He is a child with cracked lips and a stomach that has forgotten what fullness feels like. The wind gnaws through felt and bone. His hands smell like smoke and old blood because there is always something to scrape, something to boil, something to pretend is a meal. After his father dies, the tribe does not mourn him. They calculate him. And the answer is simple. This family is dead weight. One morning, the carts roll away, the hoof prints fade, and Temüjin is left watching his world abandon him like a sick animal left behind on the steppe. His mother digs for roots. He chews what should not be chewed. He learns to sleep with one ear open, and when he dares to reach for protection, the world spits the same message into his face. You are nothing without a clan, nothing without a name that matters, nothing worth saving. Yet the same boy will one day turn the earth into a drumbeat of horses. He will forge an empire stretching farther than any conqueror before him, and make kings tremble at the rumor of his riders. So how does an unwanted, discarded child become the man history remembers as Genghis Khan? The steppe does not care if you are 9 years old. It cares if you can keep a fire alive when the wind comes sideways and tries to peel the flame off the earth. It cares if you can find water when the river turns to ice and the reeds become knives. It cares if you can make your fingers obey when they are numb, because numb fingers drop a bowstring, and a dropped bowstring means you don't eat. Temüjin's life begins with omens people would later repeat, as if the sky itself had stamped him for greatness. They said he was born clutching a dark clot of blood in his fist, like a child already holding a promise of violence. But an omen is only a story you tell after you survive. In the moment, he is just a boy on the Onan River, in a world of felt tents and horse sweat, where every smile is weighed against what it costs. His father, Yesügei, is a name with weight: chief, raider, broker of marriages, the kind of man whose presence keeps wolves, human and animal, at a distance. In that life, security is not a wall, it's a person, and when that person falls, everything collapses like a tent pole snapping in a storm. Yesügei rides away and does not return the same. He has eaten at a feast that should have been ordinary, the kind of public hospitality that holds steppe society together. But old blood debts don't dissolve in shared bowls. Someone recognizes him. Poison slips into food as easily as a compliment. Yesügei makes it back to his camp only long enough to die, and the death is not just a father's death. It is a signal. It tells the surrounding clans that the strong hand is gone. Temüjin is too young to inherit authority in a world that respects only what can be defended. His mother, Hualun, watches the faces around her change. The condolences are quick. The eyes drift away. People begin to look past her, as if she and her children have already become part of the grass. Then comes the moment that stains a child's mind forever. Abandonment that happens in daylight, without even hatred. The families who had eaten with them, ridden with them, shared fires and stories. Those people hitch their carts, gather their herds, and leave. Not because Temüjin has committed a crime, not because Hualun has betrayed anyone, but because weakness is contagious, and no one wants to catch it. You can imagine the sound of it. Wooden wheels creaking, leather straps snapping, horses snorting as they are turned away, the dull thud of hooves moving as a single body, like a tide withdrawing from shore. Hualun tries to shame them, tries to invoke honor, tries to remind them of the old promises that supposedly bind men together. But on the steppe, honor bends when hunger is sharp. When the last cart disappears, the silence is louder than any argument. Temüjin stands in it and realizes something that will never leave him. The world can decide you are dead while you are still breathing. The family that remains is small, and in a place like this, small means exposed. Their camp is not a camp anymore, just a cluster of bodies trying to stay warm. trying to keep dignity from freezing. Their clothes wear thin, their meat disappears, their bones begin to show through skin. Temüjin learns the shame of being watched, of being counted as a burden by men who used to call his father leader. This is the abyss, not one dramatic catastrophe, but the slow grind of poverty in a landscape that offers beauty only to those who have enough food to notice it. The sky looks endless, but endlessness doesn't feed you. Temüjin's family turns into gatherers and scavengers. Roots are dug up with fingers until nails split. Nuts are cracked between stones. Fish are pulled from rivers with desperate patience. Small animals, marmots, field mice, squirrels, become victories measured in mouthfuls. And every time they eat, the lesson repeats. Survival is earned, not granted. In this world, stigma is a weapon as sharp as a knife. The abandoned family becomes a warning story other mothers tell their children. Stay close to power, or you will end up like them. Temüjin feels that stigma in the way people avert their eyes, in the way they speak his name with a curl of contempt, in the way boys who once might have played with him now imitate the gestures of their fathers and treat him like an outsider. There is no city gate where charity waits. There is only the steppe and the rules everyone pretends not to have written down. A widow and her sons do not deserve followers. A child cannot command adults. A family without allies can be raided without consequence. And in the middle of all this stands Hualun, thin, relentless, terrifying in her endurance. She does not let her children drift into despair because despair would kill them faster than winter. She turns work into discipline. She teaches them to watch the horizon, to read the land, to understand that a smiling visitor might be counting their horses. When you have nothing, even a guest is a risk. Temüjin absorbs her hardness like medicine. He learns to hide emotion the way you hide a blade. He learns that leadership is not speeches. It is keeping people alive when everyone else has already written their obituary. But the steppe doesn't just starve you. It pits you against the people closest to you. Scarcity makes brothers into rivals. Food becomes a currency that buys obedience. In Temüjin's camp, the older boys begin to feel the pull of dominance. Bekter, older, stronger, born of Yesügei's other wife, starts taking what he wants. In a normal family, this might be a squabble. In this family, it is a question of who will live with power and who will live with fear. Temüjin and his full brother Conqueror feel the theft like a humiliation. They have hunted. They have risked their hands and their bodies for scraps. Then someone takes the spoils because he can. On the steppe, that is not just unfair, it is an announcement. I will be your master. Hualun tries to hold the camp together, tries to keep her sons from devouring each other. She knows what it would mean if the family fractures. A divided camp is a camp that invites predators. But the boys have already been trained by their world. They have learned that softness is punished. They have learned that waiting is a luxury for people with full bellies. So one day, that tension snaps. Temüjin and Conqueror stalk Bekter as if stalking prey. There is no grand battlefield, no hero's music. There is a quiet, ugly decision. Two brothers choosing to remove a threat inside their own tent. They shoot him. They kill him. And the moment the life leaves Bekter's body, Temüjin crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. This is the part people rarely romanticize because it doesn't fit the clean myth of the innocent boy destined for greatness. It is a murder born from scarcity and power, and it reveals something important. Temüjin is not simply surviving the steppe. He is becoming the steppe. Hualun's grief is not gentle. She does not celebrate. She erupts because she understands the moral cost, even if she also understands the cold logic. She curses the violence in her own sons. She warns them what this will do to their souls. but the warning cannot undo the act. Temüjin has learned a brutal leadership lesson early. Sometimes the only way to prevent someone from owning you is to destroy them first. That lesson does not make him proud. It makes him dangerous. And danger attracts attention. People hear rumors. They see a family that should have disappeared but refuses to die. They see a boy who has already shown he can take life to secure authority. In a society that respects strength, that kind of reputation spreads, at first as caution, then as fear. This is where the villain takes shape. It is not just hunger anymore. It is the entire tribal order that abandoned him, the aristocratic lines that claim they were born to command, the factions that treat power like inheritance. Temüjin is a living insult to that order, an abandoned child who refuses to stay abandoned. So the pressure tightens. The steppe starts to close its fist around him, not in one clean moment, but in the feeling that eyes are always watching, calculating, weighing whether to crush him now before he becomes something larger. Temüjin's childhood ends the way many steppe childhoods end, not with a celebration, but with the realization that your life belongs to the strongest hand that can take it. He learns to distrust comfort, because comfort can vanish in a single morning. He learns that loyalty is rare and therefore priceless. He learns that family can be both shield and battlefield. And as he grows, thin and sharp-eyed, the steppe writes its rules into his muscles. He becomes a boy who measures every relationship by its future betrayal. A boy who watches how men treat the weak and memorizes it like a map. A boy who has already tasted the loneliness of being left behind, and who quietly swears, without saying it out loud, that no one will ever leave him helpless again. Because the next time the wheels roll away, he will be the one deciding who gets to stay. The first time they put the wooden collar on him, it doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like prophecy. A heavy kang, planks biting into the back of his neck, rubbing skin raw every time he moves. The world shrinks to a rectangle of wood and humiliation. He can't turn his head properly. He can't lie down without the edge pressing into bone. He can't even drink like a normal boy. And everywhere he goes, people stare the way you stare at a caught thief, even if the real crime is simply being inconvenient to powerful men. This is what the Taichi'u do when they decide a young Temüjin is growing too sharp. They do not argue with him. They do not negotiate. They remove him from the board like a piece that might become dangerous later. They drag him through camps so everyone can see. They make him carry his disgrace in public. A boy turned into a warning sign. But there's something the steppe never learned to fear until it was too late. Humiliation does not always break a person. Sometimes it compresses them. Sometimes it turns them into steel. At night, when the fires sink low and the guards get lazy with comfort, Temüjin listens. He listens to the small sounds that tell you what kind of cage you're in. The angle of a tent flap in the wind, the rhythm of footsteps, the brief silence when a man sets down his cup. He learns the psychology of his captors by watching what they laugh at. He watches who is cruel for sport and who is cruel because it's expected. He studies which eyes look away when he suffers, because eyes that look away are the ones that still feel something. One night, he moves, not like a desperate animal thrashing, but like a person who has decided that if the world wants him to be nothing, he will become nothing long enough to slip through its fingers. He breaks from the camp in the dark, the collar still around his neck, the wood scraping branches, the sound of it threatening to betray him every second. He runs until the air burns his throat. He runs until the grass turns slick with dew and his feet forget they're tired. Behind him, voices rise, then grow sharper, closer. Men spread out like wolves, fanning the land. Confident because what can a boy do with a wooden yoke on his shoulders? Temüjin drops into water. Cold claws up his ribs. The river takes his heat fast, steals his breath, turns his muscles into stiff rope. He slides under, leaving only his face near the surface, using reeds as a veil. He becomes a shadow with eyes, trying to slow his breathing so the water doesn't tremble around him. The search party comes close enough that he can hear them argue. He can hear them insult him, as if insults are ropes that can drag him out of the river. He can hear one man say his name with contempt, like the name itself is already dead. And then something happens that doesn't fit the step's rules. Someone sees him and doesn't shout. A man, Sorkin Shira, in the old telling, looks at the boy in the reeds and makes a decision that could get him killed. Not because Temüjin has money, not because he has power, but because the man recognizes something in the boy's eyes, a future that will remember either kindness or betrayal. Sorkin Shira turns away, pretends he saw nothing. Later, when the search party thins, he returns with help. His sons, a moment, a plan. They break the collar. They hide Temüjin the way you hide a spark in a storm. Under wool, under carts, under ordinary life. They feed him quietly. They move him like contraband. And when he finally escapes the Taichi Ud for good, Temüjin is not just free. He is awake. Because now he understands a terrifying truth. Power can be resisted, not by loud defiance, but by networks, by loyalty, by the rare human courage of someone choosing you when choosing you is dangerous. And once a boy learns that the world can be reshaped by loyalty, he begins to ask the next question. What if loyalty could be built? Not inherited, not bought with old titles, built, one life, one promise, one debt at a time. He goes back to what he has left, his mother's iron endurance, his brother's hungry eyes, the thin dignity of a family that refused to die. But he doesn't return as the same boy who was abandoned. He returns with a new internal rule, quiet and absolute. Never again. Never again will he let other people decide whether his family eats. Never again will he be carried through camps as a public joke. Never again will he survive only at the mercy of men who can change their minds. If the world is a knife, he will become the hand that holds it. And that is when he reaches for something deeper than food or shelter. He reaches for a bond. In Mongol life, there is an oath stronger than casual friendship, a brotherhood sworn, a promise sealed in ritual and memory. Temüjin finds Jamuka, a young man of higher standing, a man with a name that already tastes like leadership. They share the kind of closeness that only exists between boys who know the world is violent and still dare to dream anyway. They exchange gifts that mean more than the objects themselves. They swear to be Yanda, blood brothers. For a time, that bond feels like a bridge out of loneliness. Temüjin has been astray. Jamuka is connected. Together they can imagine something bigger than merely surviving the winter. But even in brotherhood, the steppe hides its traps. Because the steppe doesn't just ask, "Do you have friends?" It asks, "What happens when your friend becomes your rival?" Temüjin's next move looks ordinary on the surface, like tradition continuing as it always has. He goes to claim a marriage promised long ago, Borte, a girl from the Ongerat. A political tie, yes, but also something rare. A human warmth that isn't based purely on advantage. Borte's family takes him seriously even when he has little to offer. They feed him. They don't speak to him like a beggar. They treat him like a man who might become someone. In that act alone, being received with dignity, Temüjin feels the difference between a world that discards you and a world that invests in you. He takes Borte as wife, and with her, he takes a future that is not purely struggle. Then, the steppe reminds him that futures can be stolen. The Merkit come like a nightmare that gallops. They raid his camp, and they do not take what you can replace, They take Borte. A man can lose horses and recover. A man can lose felt and rebuild. But when they take your wife, they take your honor, your stability, your claim to adulthood. They take the one thing that made your hard life feel like it was turning into something human. Temüjin's reaction is not grief alone, it is ignition. Because Borte's abduction drags him back to the oldest truth of steppe life. If you cannot protect what is yours, you will lose everything again and again until you are nothing. So he does the thing abandoned boys aren't supposed to be able to do. He calls in debts. He goes to Jamuka, his blood brother, and asks for help. He goes to Togrul, known as Wang Khan, leader of the Kharat, a powerful figure tied to Temüjin's father in old alliances. Temüjin brings a gift meant to speak in the language leaders understand. A fine sable coat, expensive, deliberate. An offering that says, I may be poor now, but I know how the world works. I know what respect costs. And Togrul listens, not purely because of the coat, not purely because of sentiment, but because Temüjin's request offers something more valuable than fur, a chance to shape the balance of power on the steppe. Helping Temüjin is not charity, it's a strategic investment. With Jamuka's riders and Togrul's force, Temüjin becomes something he has never been before. He becomes backed. And when they ride against the Merkit, it isn't just a rescue mission. It's Temüjin's first true taste of coordinated power. Multiple groups moving as one body, violence organized, purpose sharpened into a spear point. They hit the Merkit camps hard, firelight and shouting, horses screaming, the kind of chaos that swallows a family's peace in minutes. Temüjin finds Borte and takes her back. The relief is real, but it is not soft. It is edged. Because now he has learned a second truth. What was taken can be recovered, if you have force. And if you have force, people begin to look at you differently. The rescue of Borte is not merely a personal victory, it is proof. Proof that Temüjin can rally stronger men. Proof that he can repay loyalty with action. Proof that he is not a disposable child anymore. He is a man who can strike back. And that is the spark. Not a gentle epiphany, not a moment of enlightenment under a quiet sky. It is the hard click of a mechanism locking into place. Temüjin sees the steppe's unwritten constitution clearly now. Tribes fracture because loyalty is narrow. Men follow aristocrats because they think blood is destiny. Leaders treat followers as tools because fear is easier than love. Everything is built on old hierarchies that abandon people the instant they lose value. So he decides to do something so threatening it will eventually set the entire steppe on fire. He decides to build loyalty differently. Not because it is morally pure, but because it is efficient and because it is personal. Because a boy who was abandoned understands the hunger for belonging better than any noble ever could. He begins to gather men not by asking who their father was, but by asking what kind of man they are when the night is cold and the risk is real. He begins to reward those who stand firm. He begins to remember names. He begins to turn "I saw you" into a form of currency. And as his circle grows, something else grows alongside it. Tension. Jamuka, born into higher standing, sees leadership as something that belongs to certain bloodlines. Temüjin sees leadership as something that must be earned every day. For a while, they can ride under the same sky with those differences hidden like knives under clothing. But the steppe has a way of forcing knives into the open. Temüjin does not say, "I will take revenge on the world." He doesn't need to. His actions say it for him. Because every follower he gains is a quiet insult to the old order. Every man who chooses Temüjin over an aristocrat is a crack in the steppe's foundation. Every victory becomes proof that abandonment did not end him. It trained him. And by the time the smoke from the Merkit raid fades into memory, Temüjin is no longer merely trying to survive. He is trying to redesign the rules of survival itself. There's a moment, after the rescue, after the alliances, after the first rush of victory, when a man realizes something that scares him more than his enemies. Force is easy to borrow, but borrowed force has strings. It belongs to someone else's pride, someone else's ambition, someone else's idea of who deserves to stand at the center of the world. Temüjin can feel those strings tightening every time Jamuka smiles a little too calmly. Every time an older noble speaks to him like he's still the abandoned boy who got lucky. And that is when the grind truly begins. When he understands that to survive, he cannot just win battles. He has to build a machine that does not depend on anyone's permission to exist. So he starts doing the most dangerous thing you can do on the steppe. He starts taking men away from the old masters, not by begging, not by bribing, by offering them something the steppe almost never offers a common man. Dignity, a place where your worth is not your father's name, but what you do when the arrows start falling. It begins quietly, like all revolutions. A handful of followers becomes dozens. Dozens become families bringing their tents closer to his. People who were treated like disposable tools by aristocrats begin to notice something strange about Temüjin's camp. When they hunt, the meat is shared according to need and contribution, not grabbed by whoever has the loudest lineage. When they ride, the weak are not immediately kicked aside. When someone proves loyal, Temüjin remembers it. He pays it back with protection and opportunity. This isn't kindness. It's design. Because Temüjin understands a psychological truth the nobles ignore. A man who has never been seen will die for the first leader who looks him in the eyes and says, "I know your name. I know what you've done. You belong here." And if you want men to die for you, belonging is more powerful than fear, at least at the beginning. But belonging alone doesn't stop betrayal. So Temüjin builds something else alongside it. A system. The steppe is used to loose loyalty. Tribes clustered around charismatic figures. Alliances changing with the wind. Temüjin hates the wind. He hates unpredictability. He hates the way his entire childhood could be erased by one decision from men in another camp. So he begins to reorganize human beings the way a blacksmith organizes iron, not by family, not by blood, but by function. He breaks the old tribal groupings and mixes men from different lineages into new units, so that no one's first loyalty is to a clan chief anymore. Their first loyalty becomes the 10 beside them, the 100 beside them, the 1,000 beside them. A structure that can move like a single body, a structure that punishes cowardice and rewards discipline, a structure that makes the idea of going back to your tribe feel like returning to chains. He turns war into administration. He turns loyalty into architecture. And the grind is brutal, because architecture requires breaking things. Every time a noble complains, Temüjin hears the same insult hidden underneath. You do not have the right. You were not born for this. He answers that insult with one of the most terrifying choices a leader can make. He makes examples. When a man steals, Temüjin doesn't laugh it off. When a man betrays, Temüjin doesn't plead. He responds with such clarity that the message travels faster than any messenger. If you break this new order, you will be cut out of it like rot from meat. The steppe has always had violence. Temüjin refines it into policy. And once violence becomes policy, it becomes cold. It becomes something you do without shaking. That is the trade. That is the part of the grind where the audience should feel uncomfortable, because 0 to hero in the steppe is not a clean climb. It is a climb where you step on people, where you harden your heart until it stops flinching. Temüjin learns to reward with precision too, because reward is the other half of discipline. A man who brings back plunder doesn't get to hoard it just because he was born higher. Temüjin distributes spoils in a way that tells every fighter, every archer, every scout, your effort feeds your family. Your courage has a measurable value here. The old aristocrats hate this. They call it upside down. They call it insulting. They call it a world where horses choose their riders. Temüjin doesn't argue. He keeps doing it, because every reward is a nail driven into the coffin of the old steppe order. And the more his system spreads, the more he attracts a specific kind of man. The kind who has been underestimated his entire life. The kind who is starving not only for food, but for significance. Men with sharp minds and scarred pride. Men who can navigate by stars, who can ride for days with no sleep, who can speak softly and kill quickly. These men become his nerves and arteries. They become the beginning of something far larger than a tribe. But the steppe is not a laboratory. It fights back. Old powers start to treat Temüjin like a disease, something that spreads by contact. Jamuka, especially, begins to feel the shift. Jamuka believes leadership should remain in the hands of those born into it. Temüjin is building a world where leadership is earned, where a shepherd can rise if he is disciplined, loyal, fierce. And once those two ideas exist under the same sky, war becomes inevitable. The break does not come with a dramatic announcement. It comes with a decision by people. Some men look at Jamuka and see the comfort of tradition. Others look at Temüjin and see the future. When followers begin to drift toward Temüjin, Jamuka feels it like theft. Not just theft of manpower, but theft of meaning. Because on the steppe, to lose followers is to lose face. And to lose face is to bleed without blood. So the rivalry turns from quiet tension into open hostility. Temüjin responds the way he responds to everything now. He prepares. He learns the art of speed and information because he understands that brute strength alone will not defeat aristocratic coalitions. He needs to move faster than rumors. He needs to see the battlefield before it forms. He builds networks of scouts and messengers, riders who can cross distances other armies would consider impossible. He pays attention to terrain the way a merchant pays attention to coin. He studies how fear moves through camps, how leaders hesitate, how alliances wobble when hunger or pride hits. And then he fights. Not like a noble seeking glory, but like a man whose entire philosophy is efficiency. Sometimes that efficiency means mercy, absorbing surrendered fighters into his ranks, turning enemies into tools of the future. Sometimes it means something darker, punishment so severe it makes betrayal feel suicidal. Because Temüjin is not just battling bodies, he's battling the steppe's old reflexes, the reflex to follow bloodlines, the reflex to fracture, the reflex to abandon. He cannot afford softness, because softness invites the world that abandoned him to return. And the grind keeps taking payment. The more he becomes a builder of order, the less room there is for the boy who once wanted to simply be safe. The more he becomes a leader, the more his life turns into constant calculation. Who is loyal? Who is pretending? Who is desperate enough to stab him in the dark? He sleeps, but not deeply. He eats, but not leisurely. He loves, but with a corner of his mind always watching the entrance of the tent. He has Berta, yes, and in her presence there is a human warmth. But even warmth in this world has to survive storms. And Temüjin is becoming a storm maker. He begins to speak in promises that are larger than any one family. He begins to shape identity itself. Not I am from this clan. Not I belong to that bloodline. But I belong to Temüjin's order. I belong to the law we ride under. I belong to the structure that protects my children. And when people start believing that, something terrifying happens. They stop being a tribe. They start being an instrument. That's when Temüjin realizes the final brutal requirement of his grind: to forge a force that can conquer He must make himself the center of gravity. Every decision must point back to him. Every oath must tighten around him. Every victory must reinforce the idea that his system is not just effective, it is destiny. And destiny has a cost. The cost is the space inside you where doubt used to live. The cost is the easy laughter you no longer trust. The cost is the boy inside you that you bury alive so the leader can keep breathing. By the end of this grind, Temüjin is no longer merely a man who survived abandonment. He is the designer of a new kind of steppe, one that will soon be strong enough to break the world beyond the grasslands. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the horizon, cities made of stone are still sleeping, unaware that a machine is being built for their destruction. When a man has been hungry long enough, he stops dreaming about food. He starts dreaming about control. Control over winter. Control over rivals. Control over the kind of morning where you wake up and don't have to wonder if the world has decided to abandon you again. Temüjin's control spreads the way fire spreads across dry grass. One camp joins, then another, then another. Some from admiration, some from fear, most from the simple calculation that his order is safer than their chaos. And when the final coalitions break, when the last proud chiefs are dragged down into the dirt, the steppe does something it has resisted for generations. It kneels into unity. A great gathering is called, a meeting that feels less like politics and more like the steppe exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Men who used to spit at each other's names now stand in the same circle because the alternative is being erased. They lift Temüjin up, not only as a leader, but as a verdict. A new title is spoken, Genghis Khan, and it lands on him like armor. This is the moment that would look like the hero shot in a simpler story. The abandoned child raised into the sky by men who once would have left him to freeze. The boy who is hunted now, surrounded by loyal riders, banners snapping, horses stamping, the sound of a nation being born in the open air. But power never arrives alone. It brings appetite. And once the steppe is unified, the machine Temüjin built has a problem that can only be solved by movement. A massive body of warriors cannot sit still. If they sit still, old rivalries return. If they sit still, hungry men start looking at each other's herds again. The steppe does not forgive stagnation. Stagnation becomes civil war. So Genghis Khan points the machine outward. He turns his gaze beyond the grasslands, toward the edges of the world his people have always circled like wolves around a fire. He looks at cities made of stone, cities that have walls, granaries, markets, libraries, palaces, cities that believe the steppe is only a wilderness that sends occasional raiders. He looks at empires that have been wealthy for so long they've forgotten what hunger feels like. And he begins to teach them. The first campaigns are not yet the full horror the world will later whisper about, but the pattern is already there. Speed, intelligence, and psychological war that hits the mind before it hits the body. He sends scouts the way other rulers send prayers. He sends messengers with demands framed as choices, but the choices are designed like traps. Submit and live under his protection. Resist and become a lesson. At first, the world doesn't understand what kind of lesson he means, because settled empires have their own ideas about war. War as season, war as ceremony, war as something that ends when the harvest needs attention. Genghis Khan does not do seasonal war. He does total war. He does war as a system. His riders move like weather. They can appear where you thought distance would protect you. They can ride for days with spare horses, shifting mounts like a man shifting breath. They can break into smaller units, disappear, then converge again as if the land itself is coordinating them. They communicate with a discipline most armies can't imagine. Orders move quickly, rumors move faster. And the rumors are part of the strategy, Because he understands something that makes him terrifying. If a city believes resistance is hopeless, you don't have to break the walls. The people will break themselves. So he uses fear the way other rulers use currency. He spends it carefully. He invests it. He turns it into a weapon that multiplies. A city hears what happened to the last city. They hear the screaming, the smoke, the silence afterward. They picture their own children in that silence. The walls feel thinner immediately. Some cities open their gates without a fight, not because they love him, but because terror has already conquered them in the dark before his horsemen arrive. And when cities resist, when they force him to bleed time and men, his answer is not just victory. His answer is demonstration. Because to keep a vast coalition loyal, he must keep fear heavier than temptation. If a commander believes betrayal might be profitable, that commander must also believe betrayal will end in obliteration. In the steppe, that logic formed him. Now he exports it to the world. That is where the bitter taste enters the mouth of the story. Because alongside his genius, alongside his meritocratic promotions, his iron discipline, his relentless efficiency, there is the shadow that follows his victories. The shadow of massacres. The shadow of terror used not as accident but as policy. The paradox is sickening in its clarity. The same man who builds law also builds annihilation. He creates order among nomads who had lived for centuries in fragmentation. He enforces rules against theft that once would have been laughed off. He protects messengers, makes trade safer, and begins laying the bones of something that will later be called a network. Roads, relays, a messenger system that turns distance into a manageable thing. He makes it possible, in time, for merchants to travel farther, for ideas to move, for goods to cross continents. But the road is paved with ashes, because the cities that resist do not just lose battles, they lose existence. This is what conquest looks like when the conqueror was raised by abandonment. He does not trust partial control. He does not trust compromise. He does not trust a defeated enemy to stay defeated unless the memory of defeat is burned into their descendants. So the victories come, and the world begins to distort around his will. In the East, the rich dynasties learn that stone walls do not scare men who grew up under an infinite sky. In the West, kingdoms hear the thunder and still don't believe it until the thunder arrives under their windows. The famous story repeats in different languages. A ruler dismisses the threat as barbarian rumor, then sees smoke rising from the edge of his world. And then comes the moment that turns expansion into something almost mythic. The collision with the great Islamic empire to the west, the Khwarezmian realm, wealthy, confident, threaded with cities and caravans, believing itself protected by distance, by bureaucracy, by the sophistication of settled life. Genghis Khan does not begin with the intention of annihilation. He begins with a trade mission, merchants moving under his authority, bearing goods and expectation, seeking the wealth that cities hoard. It could have been commerce. It could have been coexistence. But then the old steppe story plays again, in a different costume. Insult, betrayal, humiliation. A governor seizes the merchants, kills them, takes their goods. Later, envoys are mistreated, faces shaved, dignity stripped, the kind of offense that is not merely personal but symbolic. It tells Genghis Khan, in the language he learned as a boy, "You are still that disposable outsider. Your life and your word do not count." That is the wrong message to send to a man whose entire rise was built on never again being treated as nothing. The response is not proportional. It is absolute. He unleashes the full machine. And what follows is not just a war, but a rolling catastrophe. Armies splitting and converging, cities isolated, supply lines cut, panic outrunning truth. Defenses that look solid on maps crumble when faced with speed and deception. One city falls, then another. and each fall becomes a new rumor that breaks the morale of the next. This is the climax of power. A human being turning geography into a playground for strategy, turning continents into a route. But it is also the climax of cost. Because the farther his empire stretches, the lonelier he becomes inside it. A leader who has unified tribes and broken kingdoms begins to live with a specific kind of paranoia. The paranoia of someone who knows exactly how betrayal works because he has watched it his entire life. He cannot afford ignorance. Ignorance gets you poisoned at a feast. Ignorance gets your family abandoned. Ignorance gets your wife taken in the night. So even when he wins, his mind does not relax. He trusts, but he tests. He rewards, but he watches. He loves, but he remembers that love can be used as leverage. The cost shows in the way his family becomes part of the empire's machinery. His sons are not just children. They are generals, political instruments, heirs who must prove themselves under pressure that would break most men. Rivalries spark between them because empire is a crown made of knives. Questions of succession hover like a storm cloud that refuses to move on. And Berta, who was stolen and returned, becomes an anchor in a life that has turned into constant expansion. But even that anchor carries pain. The shadow of her abduction never fully leaves the story. It becomes the kind of wound that shapes how a man sees his lineage, how he sees security, how he sees the future. The irony deepens as the empire becomes undeniable. Genghis Khan's name turns into a global alarm bell. People who have never seen a Mongol still fear them because fear has traveled faster than the riders. Kings make deals they swore they would never make. City councils argue late into the night about surrender versus pride, and pride starts to look like a luxury. Yet in the quiet moments, rare, stolen, what does he feel? Does he feel satisfaction? Or does he feel the echo of that abandoned boy still watching carts roll away? Because conquest does not erase the past. It often amplifies it. When you have enough power to take anything, you begin to realize what you were actually chasing was something you cannot conquer with an army. Safety, belonging, a world that won't discard you. And the cruel twist of his life is that his success proves he can bend the world. But it cannot guarantee that the world will ever feel gentle. He wins, and he keeps winning, and the empire grows like a shadow at sunset, stretching over lands he never knew existed when he was chewing roots to quiet his hunger. But the taste of success is mixed. Gold arrives, and so do corpses. Order arrives, and so does terror. Law arrives, and so does annihilation. And the machine he built, this magnificent, horrifying instrument, now moves so fast that even he must chase it. Because once you teach men to believe your destiny, you can't slow down. Destiny has no brakes. Even the greatest conqueror eventually discovers the one enemy that never negotiates: time. There is no city wall high enough to keep it out. No cavalry fast enough to outrun it. No law strict enough to punish it. Genghis Khan can split empires, bend kingdoms, and make the world speak his name in a whisper, but he cannot stop his own body from aging under the same sky that once watched him starve. As the years pass, the empire becomes less like a story and more like a system. Riders move along routes that didn't exist before. Orders travel across distances that used to feel like the edge of the earth. A messenger can ride from one end of his authority to another and find fresh horses waiting like a heartbeat, kept alive by discipline. The steppe, once scattered and unpredictable, now behaves like a single organism. And the world beyond the steppe is forced to adapt. Merchants begin to move differently. They calculate risks differently. A caravan leader who once feared local bandits now fears imperial attention, because within this new order, theft is punished, but defiance is crushed. trade becomes safer in some ways, more dangerous in others. Silk, spices, metalwork, horses, furs, goods move across continents not because the world has become kinder, but because one will has made movement predictable. Ideas move with the goods. Languages mingle in marketplaces that used to never meet. Techniques travel. Maps become more accurate. People who would have remained strangers for generations now collide, exchange, imitate, and sometimes contaminate each other with new thoughts and new diseases. This is the strange legacy of conquest. It stitches the world together with thread made of violence. And the stitch holds for a long time. Because Genghis Khan, for all his brutality, leaves behind something that outlives his own breath, an administrative genius built from steppe logic. He has turned loyalty into structure, structure into discipline, discipline into the capacity to govern. He has also left behind a moral argument that refuses to die. To some, he is the destroyer who reduced cities to ash, whose wars killed on a scale that makes the mind go numb. To others, he is the lawgiver who ended tribal feuding, who elevated men by merit rather than bloodline, who protected envoys, standardized systems, and made trade routes function with unprecedented reach. Both images are true, and that is why he becomes a mirror, not a monument. Because when you look at him, you are forced to confront what you believe about power. Are great achievements still great if they are paid for with suffering? Is order still order if it is enforced through terror? Is a man's childhood pain an explanation or an excuse? Somewhere inside that question lives the most uncomfortable truth of his story. The world did not create him gently. The world created him the way storms create rivers, by pressure, by cruelty, by relentless need. When Temüjin was abandoned, the steppe taught him that survival requires control. When he was humiliated, it taught him that dignity must be seized. When Borta was taken, it taught him that love without power is vulnerable. Every wound became a lesson. Every lesson became a policy. And every policy became an empire. So what does that mean for the rest of us? It means abandonment is not just a personal tragedy. In certain worlds, it is a training program. It can create a person who collapses inward, or a person who expands outward until the world itself has to make room. But the price is almost always paid in tenderness. Because tenderness, in the steppe's arithmetic, is the first thing you spend when you need to survive. Toward the end, the stories around his death turn hazy, as if history itself is unsure how to narrate the exit of a man who changed the shape of the earth. Some say he dies during a campaign against the Western Shia, the last stubborn target refusing to kneel. Some say the cause is injury, illness, the ordinary fragility of flesh. The details blur, but the certainty remains. He dies as he lived, moving, pressuring, demanding submission from a world that once refused to feed him. And then comes one final act of control that feels almost poetic in its severity. His burial is hidden. No grand tomb raised to the sky. No public place where enemies can spit on his memory or followers can turn him into a god. The location is concealed, the trail erased, the steppe swallowing him back into itself like the sea swallowing a ship. Even in death, he refuses to be handled. But the empire does not die with him. That is the true measure of his transformation. A raider's success dies when the raider dies. A system's success lives on. His successors inherit not only lands, but an ideology of motion and discipline. The Mongol Empire expands further, fractures later into great khanates, shapes Eurasia's future in ways even its builders cannot fully predict. The shockwaves reach far beyond battlefields, into trade, diplomacy, cultural exchange, technological diffusion, and the reshaping of borders that will influence the centuries that follow. And still, the argument continues. Because history cannot decide whether to fear him more than it respects him. Maybe the legacy is not meant to be comfortable. Maybe that discomfort is the lesson. Because the story of Genghis Khan warns us about what happens when a society treats a child as disposable. When it abandons someone and assumes abandonment is the end. When it believes weakness will simply vanish if you refuse to look at it. Sometimes it vanishes, and sometimes it comes back as a storm. So here is the question that lingers after the hoofbeats fade. If Temüjin had been protected instead of discarded, if his tribe had stayed, if hunger had not carved him into iron, if humiliation had not taught him revenge, would the world have been spared? Or would someone else, shaped by some other cruelty, have risen to do the same? When you look at his life, do you see a villain forged by suffering? Or a survivor who turned survival into destiny? What do you think? Was Genghis Khan a monster, a genius, or the inevitable product of the world that created him?